So here we are. Not where I'd necessarily want them to be, but they're here. You can celebrate mediocrity all you want. It is what it is now. The Chicago Bears, 8-8, backdoored their asses into the playoffs. They got in. What are you going to do? I mean, you're a Bears fan. I know there's plenty of you that are trying to convince yourself, and you're trying to believe, and you want to believe that this Bears team could go out on Sunday and win this game against the Saints. You want to believe because you say, well, now that they've made it, you might as well try and do something. And for the record, I agree. Like, now that you made the playoffs, might as well try to make a good show out of it. Might as well try to win this game. Ain't no worry about tanking or anything like that or anything, because whatever happens with a Trubisky, Nagy pace, unless they get steamrolled like 59-3 on Sunday, win or lose, whatever decisions the McCaskey family was going to make, we're going to make, they've already made them. Like, I have no doubt in my mind about that. And I don't think this game's going to have a whole hell of a lot of bearing on it, frankly, one way or another. So, it's time to buckle up and prepare for Sunday. And if you're a Bears fan, you're looking at this team and you're saying, yes, they are 8-8. And it was kind of a yo-yo roller coaster type of season. They started off 5-1, and then they lose 6 games in a row, and then they kind of seem to find themselves a little bit late in the year, but I would also counter and argue more so that they found a good lull in the schedule. They faced a bunch of crappy defenses that made their offense look a whole hell of a lot better than it actually really is. And, you know, when they face a good team, they really, really struggle, especially in the closing part of the season. And if you're a Bears fan, I think you got to be disheartened. You could sit there and point to the history, the recent history, which recent history now extends back almost 3 decades, talking about the Bears and Packers and how the Packers just own the Bears. Favre owned them for a decade and a half. Now Aaron Rodgers is their daddy. Like, you can point to that and you can talk to that, but there's still something. And you can talk about injuries, you can talk about this, you can talk about any number of things and excuses and bad excuses at that. The bottom line is, the Bears were supposed to have a mindset going into Sunday's game. You had guys like Eddie Jackson whining, pissing and moaning and bitching about all the trash talking the Packers were doing when they really weren't. Like, having to manufacture motivation. How about catch the damn ball? There you go. All this talk, and the Bears go out there and play this really scared, conservative, but somewhat effective offensive football for the first 3+ quarters, and then the wheels fall off. And all the while, this defense that has been invested incredibly heavily in stunk. They stunk. There's no other way to put it. Like, you can sit there and buy into the crap of, oh, it's the fourth quarter, it was 21-16. You could also point to the fact that Marquez Valdes-Scantling dropped a wide open bomb that would have made it 28-16. It would have truly made it game over early on in the third quarter. Even within that game, it felt like the Bears were getting quite a number of breaks, especially in the first half, all the way from the opening kickoff with what happened with Cordell Patterson. I still think it's one of the stupidest rules that you have. He goes out of bounds, touches the ball, so it's down at the 40, even though the ball's still in bounds. Like, I don't care if that happened to the Bears or the Packers. A stupid rule is a stupid rule. But the Bears don't win. They end up getting, handled, realistically, if you want to talk about it, on Sunday by the Packers. But because the Cardinals didn't get it done against the Rams, here are the Bears. And now they get a rematch against the Saints, who they faced off against in the regular season. And it's a different period of time. When you talk about this Saints team versus the Saints team from then, it's also a different Bears team from what you're talking about then. In that first matchup of the season, it was back when Nick Foles was the starting quarterback for the Bears. It was a situation where the Bears were struggling to run the ball. They were struggling somewhat offensively for sure. And the defense was starting to show some of the cracks that I talked about before the season that were there, and that Pagano was going to do his damnedest to find. And boy, has he ever, right, guys? But it comes down to overtime, and Will Lutz, I believe it was, kicked the game-winning field goal, and the Saints won in OT 26-23. And if you remember, that was at the early stages of that 6-game losing streak right there in the middle of the year. But the Saints were a different team then too. Michael Thomas was not there. So Drew Brees went into this game without his number one weapon. Not that it should have mattered much, because the dude can't throw over 10 to 15 yards down the field consistently with any type of reliability. And the Bears just couldn't figure that out. Chuck Pagano couldn't figure that out. So if you're a Bears fan, though, you look at this and you say, okay, 8-8, unless you're really dumb or really trying to fool yourself, you know this team is not very good. You know it. And you also know that as much as you want to believe that the offense is a little bit better than it was earlier on in the year, maybe it is. But it's more about the style. They've really shrunken the playbook, and they've really minimized what they do to try and maximize what they have in Trubisky, and they focus more on the running game, playing it really close to the vest. It was really, frankly, the only shot that they had to keep it close with Green Bay. It wasn't like they were playing great offensively. They were sustaining drives, and that was kind of impressive. But Green Bay themselves, under defensive coordinator Mike Pettin, that's not exactly a great defensive unit. They're average, middle of the road. But when it came time to hit some big plays, they just couldn't get it done. But you look at this team and you say, okay, the Bears, yes, they went through the back door to the playoffs, but they're in. And once you're in, technically anything can happen. And that is true. Except this team getting to and winning a Super Bowl. That's not happening. Don't be stupid. But when you look at recent history, and you look at teams like the Panthers a few years ago, I think they got in at 7-8-1. They won a playoff game. There is some precedent here for these mediocre to bad teams. I think it was the Seahawks in 2010, weren't they 7-9 when they won the NFC West? And then the wild card round, they beat this Saints team, if I remember correctly, because that's the beast mode run. And that's the beast quake, whatever you want to call it. So there is some precedent here. And you look at this Bears team and you say, okay, maybe they're able to run the ball a little bit better, play it a little closer to the vest, keep the ball out of Drew Brees' hands. They played him tough early in the season, and they had Drew Brees then, and the Bears had the handicap of starting Nick Foles. There are arguments to be made. Let's be clear. A lot of people are just going to sit there and say that the Bears are going to wiped out by 30. Now, that could certainly happen. But I don't think that's anything that you should bank on, and I don't think that's anything that should be a foregone conclusion. Because the matchup's not that bad for the Bears. Now, if you talk about Roquan Smith is potentially out for this game, if he is, that sucks. If Darnell Mooney ends up being out for this game, that really sucks. If Jalen Johnson ends up not playing this game, that sucks even more because he's been out the past few weeks. When you look at that, you're starting to talk about some key, big, important pieces. Like Roquan had a great year in the middle of that Bears 3-4 defense. Darnell Mooney is the most exciting weapon they have in the passing game. Jalen Johnson, I think, had a solid rookie season as a number 2 corner opposite of Kyle Fuller. These are not just guys. These are important guys that this team could be without on Sunday afternoon. So that matters. But I look at the Saints team again. Yeah, you'll have Michael Thomas there. But you just got the news that even though Alvin Kamara looks like he's going to be off the COVID list and playing on Sunday, that's a huge get back for the Saints. And certainly no coincidence that this game just happened to be scheduled on Sunday so that way the NFL could ensure Kamara played, right? Right? Exactly. But then you find out that Trey Hendrickson, who was second in the league in sacks this year, is going to be out on Sunday. So a little bit of a break for that Bears defensive line, who could certainly struggle in pass protection. But you look at the Saints and you say, okay, what's so great or star-spangled awesome or spectacular about them that we couldn't see a similar game to what we saw during the regular season? Especially when you look at the Saints in recent years, they have this recent history of blowing it in these big spots in the playoffs. Like last year, nobody gave the Vikings a chance. Nobody gave the Vikings a chance. And yet they went down to New Orleans in the Super Bowl, and they beat the Saints in overtime. Whether you think it was an offensive pass interference call or not, at the end of the day, doesn't matter. The Saints didn't do enough to handle business to win the game. And if the Bears, like, to me personally, this is me personally, if the Bears want to have visions of winning this game, they need to go back and watch that film from last year's wild card round game where the Vikings went in and they beat the Saints, and they've got to take whatever they can, glean whatever they can out of that game, and apply it here. And that probably means that they're going to have to be pretty conservative. That probably means that they're going to have to run the ball a lot, which I'm not saying necessarily is a bad strategy when you're trying to win the game. It's more of a reflection to me of how much Mitchell Trubisky is not that dude, and that should be clearly established at this point. And your whole thing of, well, they made the playoffs with him. Rex Grossman made it to a fucking Super Bowl. Your point is invalid and, frankly, stupid. But what concerns me more, like, and to me, even talking about that Packers game in Week 17, like, even if you wanted to believe the offense was better, that was less concerning to me than the defense. Like, his defense has been really bad. And you say, well, they weren't bad against the Jags. Well, they weren't great either. And the Jags were intentionally trying to tank, so that doesn't really count. The Texans game. The Texans, didn't have anybody around Deshaun Watson in that game, almost literally. Like, it was a skeleton crew on that offense. But they got shredded twice by the Packers. And the second game in particular could have been even worse. They gave up over 30 to the Lions. They struggled to stop the Vikings. Like, this is a defensive unit that has become not good. And I can just easily blame Chuck Pagano because he's utilizing all these people in all the wrong ways. And that's true. I could also blame the fact that they're still running a 3-4 when maybe actually now, based off the personality they have, it might make sense in the offseason to switch to a 4-3. That is also true, in my humble opinion. But, there's something there on the players. Like, I will watch a game and Akeem Hicks is sitting there talking shit. Like, you haven't done anything in the game. Your team is down. Your defense is playing like crap. This whole talking trash to the opponent is not firing anybody up. It makes you look like a jackass. And if you want somebody to fire you up, let's hope that Javon Wims and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson have a round two, huh? Oh, my goodness. Well, that's what worries me about this game. The Bears' offense is not very good. Do not kid yourself. They are playing it very close to the vest because they know what they've got. More importantly, they know what they don't have. And they realize that keeping the ball out of Drew Brees' hands and that offensive hands of the Saints is probably the best shot they have to win. And they are absolutely right. It also helps keep their defense off the field, which at this point in time is way more important than you probably ever thought you were going to say about the Chicago Bears team in 2020. But that's the reality. But in what could be Drew Brees' last season, now I can't see the Bears beating them. Could it certainly happen? Yes, it absolutely could. Because the Bears might have some confidence. But we just got to be honest here. Like, you feel better about this team if it comes down to a field goal late because Cairo Santos has had a phenomenal year. I don't trust this defense. I don't trust him to be able to figure out how to defend Michael Thomas. I don't trust him to be able to figure out how to defend Jared Cook. I don't trust him to figure out how to defend Alvin Kamara in the passing game. I don't trust their pass coverage. I don't trust the way that Chuck Pagano uses them. And that, as much as the offense, is why I think the Bears will lose on Sunday, and it'll all be one big waste of time, and you'll be back to talk about how mediocre Chicago is and everything else. I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking this is maybe some type of 27-16 type of game. I don't anticipate it being truly a wipeout, but it feels like it's going to be one of those games where even when the Bears are close in theory, you always feel like it's not as close as the score indicates. The Bears, we've got to hope on Sunday they can get the ball first and do what they did against Green Bay, is go out there, take advantage of the situation, march down the field in that first drive, take time off the clock and score. And if they do that, the longer they stay in this game, the better chance they have to win it. I don't see much of a reason to feel incredibly confident about their chances Sunday. So Bears fans, you let me know what you think. Saints fans, let me know how you're feeling about this game headed into Sunday. All I can say is the Bears better not go out there and get rolled and roasted, because if they get rolled and roasted, then it's just going to make everybody look stupid for getting behind this 8-8 team getting into the playoffs.